My personal experience, we grew up, Mum was a beneficiary. We lived in a state house. I was funded through university through a student allowance and got a scholarship to go and study overseas. In some quarters I'd be coined a bludger. My family would be bludgers. What I actually think is we were supported to get through a difficult period and to do well and to make sure that you're not a future consumer of more public service. I'd like to think that was a good outcome rather than a poor one. And my council experience also suggests that we are much better placed to have councils that are responsible for those public services and their delivery as opposed to privatising them. Some good examples, our parking wardens. We were told in the 80s as a city that should all be contracted out. You know what, we just brought them in and we've managed to do so. We get a better service, we're saving $200,000 a year and we're paying our staff a living wage because we're not paying that profit margin across the top. Likewise, Positively Wellington Venues has been formed into a CCO, but it's had an unintended consequence as well. They had an obligation to be cash flow positive rather than the $600,000 subsidy that was being paid. But what we've seen, the unintended consequence, all that's happening now is we're charging arts organisations more who can least afford it.
Our city will flourish if we prepare for the future now. We need to focus on the big projects, attract and retain successful talent and businesses, future-proof infrastructure for growth, like double tunnelling the Mount Vic and Terrace tunnels, build an iconic harbour cycleway for everyone to enjoy, protect our native flora and fauna with practical environmentalism and reduce wasteful council spending. I've led the council's economic development for 6 years and we've made terrific growth and progress, and as Mayor I'll take that leadership to the next level, working with whoever's in government to ensure we get our fair share of government investment. I will do what's good for Wellington. I want a vibrant, growing, environmentally sustainable city that our children will want to live in. We have a fantastic world-class public sector. We need to keep and build what we have here in Wellington. Exporting public sector services so we can earn more and develop our people, skills and experience has huge merit. Growing our public servants is a good thing to do. We're world beaters in many areas. Let's work with government and our universities to promote a school of government and bring in international students to learn from us about managing fisheries, environmental issues, trade negotiations. Let's export our expertise around the world where we can make a difference. This can be a big play. If people want to learn about best practice government, then Wellington and New Zealand can be the exemplar.
Bill English wants us, you and I, to spin out of government, and I'm going to elaborate, and to spin out of some government functions. Only Joe English Coughlin will know what is in Bill English's mind. I don't. What is important is to examine privatisation and to examine what is behind the masks of the candidates. Billboards and silly promises just don't make it. So what are the core values? My creds, my mask off. I am experienced, I'm the longest serving councillor and I'm ready to lead the council and the city. I have been a PSA member, an NZEI member. I worked long years in the public sector, central government. I objected to the Airport Authority becoming a company when a Labour minister, Mr Prebble, was the minister. My core values are Labour, Social Democratic and Green. I am concerned that a councillor, Lester, the Labour candidate, supports the sale of assets, the Civic Centre in particular, supports the establishing of a CCO, the Urban Development Agency, which will see all our land privatised, and finally, or could do, and certainly will see compulsory acquisition if the resolution of council is carried out. Finally, English will and is decimating local government through the Local Government Amendment Act number 2. You, PSA, have made a huge contribution. I want you to help me and me to help you save public services in local government and central government.
There doesn't seem to be much policy analysis going on in the local government here. You've got people making extraordinarily rash promises off the top of their heads, spending large amounts of money. We had of course, the 8 big ideas. which now seem to be redundant because the economy is growing anyway, yet they're still pushing the rates up to 5.4% for residential ratepayers, and our debt is blowing out to 800 million by 2025. So whether you think this is a good place to exemplify good practice is a matter of debate. I would commit to keeping residential rates below the national rate of inflation, which has been a cumulative 2.5% over the last since 3 years, since 2013. As regards the airport, I'm absolutely against that. Again, I think this is an example of a kind of cosy relationship between the public and the private sectors, and I think the devotion of $80 million of our money to essentially private beneficiaries is quite wrong. And I think this is an example of the sort of thing that Bill English has in mind, this kind of mixed private-public sector kind of operation, which does not bode well for analysis, does not bode well for measured decision-making.
Public service is absolutely core to Wellington. This is the number of people who work in core public service administration. Now obviously there's a whole range of other things, like health and education, etc. outside of that, but that is the number of people, and it's gone up in the last 7 years. It's 8.8% of Wellington City jobs. The national average, including Wellington, is 1.3%, so that shows how important the public sector is to us. And it's not just the public sector itself alone, but it's also all the things that you will go and spend your money on. You buy a house, you operate a car, you go and get coffee, you go to service the bars, the retail, etc. So public sector has a huge impact on Wellington, and also, as we've already heard, a huge impact on our intellectual capacity. The debate that goes on in Wellington, I think, is something that doesn't happen in many other places in our national community. We'll go to the second one. And I absolutely agree that we have some of the best public servants in the world, and one of the best public service systems in the world, and I think we should be immensely proud of that. You should be immensely proud of that as public servants. Can we share some of that and still remain public servants? Well, I guess if you're not a public servant, that means you're a consultant, and you have been in a sense privatised. But as a public service, can we share some of that expertise with other people who maybe don't do some of these things quite as well as we do here in New Zealand? Maybe there is a role for doing that. I thought Bill English's speech was slightly odd, and I went back to find it. It's actually Joe Coughlin's campaign launch, because he said a couple of things there, and he said, good thing he said, we've got some of the best government services intellectual property in the world, completely endorsed that. But then he said something very curious. He said a growth-oriented Wellington Council could support a government proposal to spin out of government some functions and privatise them so they could become export businesses. Now, I didn't know that the government was going to ask us how it was going to run itself, so I thought that was an extremely curious thing to say. Most important thing, if you go back to the previous one, most important thing here, and I think one of the biggest threats to the public sector at the moment, is the ability to give free and frank advice, not what the ministers want to hear, but give your free and frank professional advice. If I can say one last thing, which is the LGNZ conference, there are some people around the country who are seeing their solution to their economic woes as to be flogging public servants from Wellington. I think that is something which we must strongly resist, because we are a public service town, and that is a very, very important part of Wellington's DNA.
Bill English is talking about the idea of spinning out government services, but in fact they are already being spun out. New Zealand's public sector is a real shining beacon in the world, particularly a real joy for Wellington because of its integrity, because New Zealand is one of the least corrupt countries in the world, and because it's pretty transparent over here. But we started spinning the services out quite a long time ago, and I don't really think it's anything to do with City Council. But to give you some examples, the Callaghan Innovation was originally the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, and now that's very much involved in the private sector. And as globalisation increases, national sovereignty has become eroded because of things like free trade negotiations and international regulation. But digital technology is also going to make this more of an issue where things become more and more privatised. Ireland has done this very well, and it's something we should perhaps be looking at, selling technical government processes abroad, hugely successful, like energy systems, and helping other countries that don't have the same resources. And we could, of course, be lending our trade negotiators to the Brexit team, because Britain has run out of trade negotiators because they haven't needed them for quite a few decades. We have had an outstanding example of a government service that's been spun out, the Met Service. Its Metro Weather branch provides services all around the world. But the most important thing is, if we're going to retain a really good public service, is to have a Wellington that's affordable. And we've had a recent 5.4 rates increase average, which for many people is over 7%. And that makes Wellington unaffordable. As a candidate for the mayoralty and a candidate for the Lambton ward, I'm a first-term councillor, by the way, I have pledged to freeze the rates at inflation, because we cannot freeze people out of Wellington by making it too expensive to live. I'm not promising big vanity projects, but I am championing economic growth so that we can retain our graduates and that's the last one, is it? Right, retain our graduates and make sure that Wellington continues to grow in a sustainable and intelligent way.
It's about a much longer train, and it starts, I think, with the attraction of Wellington as a destination to study. People seeing public service as a career, coming and studying here, moving into the public sector, developing their skills that benefit both their city and their country, and developing careers that really add to what is a wonderful place to live. The public service remains at the centre of Wellington's economy as well. The driver of incomes that in turn drive a much stronger economy in terms of the private sector and entertainment. It helps make Wellington what it is. I've been asked to talk about Bill English's suggestion that public entities could be rolled up and spat out as sort of private businesses, and I think we know what that means. It means smaller, cheaper, fewer, more outsourcing, a reduction of public services, of what public services deliver, and I think that the idea that a council, as Bill English indicated, would be part of that is frankly, it's nonsensical, and I wouldn't support the Wellington City Council under my leadership helping the government to do that. But as I've said, we are under some threat here. This idea that the notion that the public service should be spread across New Zealand, that's really beginning to get some leverage in some parts of provincial New Zealand. What can the council do to support the public service? I think there are many things. It's about connections and relationships, not just with politician to politician, but institution to institution. I think understanding how a council can support the rollout of public services, about how Wellington can be made a more attractive city to live and to work in, and that is around public space and transport, as well as the general economy, arts, culture and entertainment.